Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and welcome to 2021. Welcome to our new season. Welcome, Caitlin Flanagan, finally back on the Femsplainers.
Thank you so much. It took, national crisis to blast me out of my bed of pain.
We missed you. We missed your incisive commentary on Rudolph. Holiday episode.
Don't shame me, girl.
and then, here we were, like 2021. Goodbye, 2020. Mm-hmm. January 6th. Look what happens. I have made myself a cocktail for this.
I think the listeners should know about the time difference that's going on.
Yeah.
Where it's 2:00, a tad early for us in the West to start our tippling. And then you get to call us with your beautiful Manhattan poured into your grandmother's Art Deco glass. It's not right, Danielle.
I don't know, 5:00 somewhere, as they say, but this year, Jesus, come on. This was
no, absolutely no judgment on you, just on me for not living in a better time zone, so I can start drinking earlier.
Well, I think anybody can drink at any time now. There are no rules right now because I'm in Washington, D.C. There are more soldiers in the Capitol than there were in the Civil War. And it's weird because, I remember during the Black Lives Matter during the summer that you were in Los Angeles and like a block away, there were, the Black Lives Matter leading into all the assorted riots that then blew up last summer. And that was like a block away and you were kind of hunkered under your sofa. And we're kind of in that reverse position right now. Although you never know, where we are, it's all on TV unless David and I, after I record this, we're going to go out for dinner, which we can still do in a kind of correct, socially distanced way. But we're going to do a little tour of downtown and just see what we can see. To the degree.
In your Humvee?
In my fortified smart car.
Don't do it, Danielle. I hate those.
So you had this amazing piece in the Atlantic called "The Worst Revolution Ever." Like, just let's just go with your thoughts. Go with your thoughts about anything, Caitlin.
Okay. Well, I didn't have high hope. Everybody had really high hopes for 2021 because we'd be out of this accursed year. But I always said, what happened after 1939? 1940.
And then 41.
Exactly. So, it doesn't, hellscapes don't really, regard our calendars.
Yeah.
But this, I'm 59, so I've seen a lot in America. And outside of 9/11, nothing has shocked me. Nothing has shocked me more than what happened in the Capitol. And even with 9/11, as unbelievable as it was to me, my husband had been, I live in LA, we live in cities, and he'd always said, boy, cities are such easy targets someday for a bomb, some kind of big bomb, a terrorist bomb. So when it happened, I thought, he was right. But with this, never in a million years did I think I would see this. I didn't even imagine something like it. And I can't, when the Covington thing happened and the media was so nasty. The Catholic boy who got shouted down. Yes, he was just a Catholic boy who didn't know what to do when he was being sort of passive aggressively, had this Native American guy was playing the drum in front of his, This was on the steps of the Capitol, or anyway, it was on the mall. It was at the Lincoln Memorial. Yeah. And the press was just so thirsty for and he had a MAGA cap on the boy. And the press was so thirsty to create him as a vicious, racist, savage person. And everyone from the New York Times on down got the story completely wrong. Right. And I was outraged. And I wrote a long piece about it saying the American media is so diseased, they can't even understand it. He was this kid, he's not doing anything. He doesn't know what to do. He's literally, his only sin is smiling. in a kind of enigmatic way. And everyone from Samantha Guthrie to the New York Times, everybody was just appalling. So I'm always one to sort of stand up and say, hey, media, we're out of control. You know, this is just a leftist predetermined vision that we try to slap on every story, and it's ugly and it's going to have consequences. Never in my life did I imagine this. And what I got wrong in my piece, you know, I was kind of writing it in real time, so we didn't really know who was there. And I was just assuming it was uneducated people, you know, kind of rednecks. I just assumed that because all my life I've thought an education is the force in America that separates the people who know how to behave in this world, and those who just maybe don't know because they weren't able to get an education. And so, as people have rightly said, I was incredibly wrong on the class issue. There were so many deeply educated, highly accomplished men. And in the Capitol, they were literally shitting on the floors of the Capitol and spreading it around. And the fact that they were beating up cops. And, you know, last summer, it was frightening to me. There was just looting very, very close to my house, really intense looting.
Right, like a block away. You were describing like fires.
Yeah, I mean, it was intense looting on Melrose, where there's a kind of commercial district with nice shops. Yeah. But I have been around looting before. It's unsettling, but looters generally don't have any agenda of harming people. They just want to get the stuff. But as the summer rolled on and the cities were burning, and whatever authorities either didn't want to or weren't able to curtail what was happening, that was shocking to me. And I haven't written about it yet. I think I will. It was just too politically dangerous to say anything about it at the time. I would have lost my career to write honestly about it.
What about
the fact that these cities are on fire?
Yeah.
And the press is saying nothing. You know, the hashtag peaceful protests. Yeah, there were incredible marches that were entirely peaceful. And there was incredible civic destruction that occurred that was in no way curtailed. And that was really shocking to me. But I thought, okay, the animating principle here is something I can understand. That, you know, when I first heard about George Floyd, I saw the headline and it said that a Black man had been killed by a cop and was saying, I can't breathe. And I just assumed it was an article about the Freddie Gray case, because never in my wildest imaginings did I think another Black man would be asphyxiated by a cop in broad daylight with a crowd, with videos rolling. So I just assumed it was Freddie Gray. And so when it was an entirely different person, there was a rational aspect to the burning of cities, because what the hell else are you going to do if you said everything you can, marched everywhere you can, elected everybody it's possible to be elected, and here's another Black man sadistically murdered by an white American cop that is on video for all of us to see and the whole world to see. And you could understand absolutely that the animating idea of those riots and the protests, but I'll speak to the riots, was an animus against cops. It made complete sense. And so I thought, okay, the country's breaking down between the right wing or conservatives in general, who are extremely respectful of cops and always stand up for cops, and then the extreme left wing, and even some moderate leftists who think, well, the extreme left wings who hate cops, who absolutely hate cops and want them defunded and abolished and all of this. So I understood that. But then to see this happening and these men literally beating a police officer with an American flag on a flagpole, and using that to beat a cop. And I thought, we're at the end of something. We're very, very near to the end of something. If both sides are hating the police, hating America in a way, hating, these men. I just assumed they were uneducated. And when I found out that educated men were part of this raid, threatening the lives of our elected leaders, people always say how fragile democracy is. And you're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. It's not fragile. I'm an American. It really did shock me.
Yeah. And I just want to put in a sort of woman on the street perspective, because during the summer here, there were, as of course, a lot of Black Lives Matter rallies. And I didn't go down, but my husband, David, and my two daughters, my eldest daughter was staying with us at the time, went down to watch and observe. And I cannot tell you what a goon state it was downtown, that for all the, complaints of like looting happened after one of the marches. A couple of CVS's got hit. Our local Saks Fifth Avenue was
Good Lord.
Good Lord. What are things coming to?
It just got real, Danielle.
Yeah. So like one of my lines is like, okay, besieging the Capitol is a little different from besieging Saks Fifth Avenue people. But anyway, but downtown this summer, masses of crowds, all respectful. And you had this police state of defense that the Trump administration has gone so far as hiring like prison guard goons. And I'm using that word deliberately. They were sort of a mishmash. They didn't have uniforms. As David said, they didn't have regular shoes. Like these were not trained military people with crowd control. It was actually kind of disturbing because they could have been very trigger happy. There was no sort of that control of a crowd that the National Guard training might have. So you had this whole kind of odd force, and the Capitol Police, who were the most civilized of them, and they were out, but it was really that they'd brought in these reinforcements almost independently. And all of the White House has been cordoned off by wire fences. And it was very disheartening. And then they take these peaceful protesters and they buzz them with helicopters. They use tear gas. So I think that this comparison, that when they had all this warning, of what could potentially happen on January 6th. And there was none of that. And that it is very, very fair when people complain, that we have a lot of Black people coming to town to protest. Let's board up the stores. Let's get out the prison goons. And then when this happened and there was nobody, and I mean, as we're finding out what happened, and part of the problem seems to be that when help was asked for the National Guard, whatever chains in the bureaucracy, there was a lot of pushback of, well, we don't like to say that Trump supporters need security in the way.
God.
So, I think what we're seeing now is like what you said. It's like, at first it looked like some, can I say, Blade Runner-y crowd? Yes, actually, they look like, some of the people look like paintings out of the Civil War, those faces with the long beards and the kind of, or even out of like French Revolutionary,
yes, that's what I was responding to in the beginning. But then you sort of saw like Patagonia jackets and,
And then you find out, there's like lawyers and state congressmen and it was just a completely different thing. One of the things you said in your article, I'm pulling it up because it was there's just so many pull quotes from this, Caitlin, as always. But you brought up this idea of Robert Bly, whom I had not thought about since the 90s.
Yeah.
You said, okay, here it was. You brought Robert Bly, and you note that Bly was part of the movement that coined the term toxic manhood, the toxicity being office work and too much time around bossy women, and the antidote being a return to the original state of dude nature, roaring, beating drums. So Bly wrote that book, like you go off and you go in the woods, you start beating drums and reconnecting with your masculinity. And then, but then you said this was not a low T group. This was a group that had been robbed and diminished by radical feminism. And they proved it by defecating on the floors and tracking their own filth through the hallways. And then you added they were dazed by power and limited in their conception of what to do with it. So I'm sort of interested in this as sort of like men, this idea of these men, largely white, getting mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore movement.
Mm-hmm. Well, what Bly was responding to, people have picked up the phrase toxic masculinity, and they mean it a man who's dangerous or violent with women or, gets together with other, adolescent males and does something violent. But it was the opposite. He was saying that office work and the rising women's movement and these sorts of things had separated men from some kind of eternal nature that they had. And he was kind of, instead of sort of saying, let's think about what it is like to be, a man in the 90s, he was saying we have to go all the way back to sort of prehistoric times and beat our animal skin drums and whatever. But he was onto something, which is that men, particularly white, all men, have been really unrooted in a way that's been intentional and in a way that hasn't been intentional. They've really been unrooted from their established roles and purpose in life. And there's just a sense that a lot of men feel it's not wrong. If they had just been in the Capitol protesting peacefully and talking about the issues that they're upset about, extreme media bias, maybe, I don't know, affirmative action, changing the landscape of their kids' college admission or something, it would have been an interesting series of points that they were making. But when they broke into the Capitol, in a way, it was the ultimate culmination of the Robert Bly movement, because they were, there's always that thing you read in text that, men needed women because we civilized men. Men had to be civilized to get a woman, you had to adhere to some, and all of politeness. You read these like Claude Levi-Strauss and everybody, politeness itself developed as a way for men to impress women and ultimately get sex from them. So there was this idea that women were civilizing men in this way, and they were fighting against it in the ugliest. It was as though it was like the movie of the Trump administration reached the final ultimate conclusion, where these men had been relieved of everything that made them civilized. And they didn't respect America. They didn't respect our elected representatives. They didn't respect cops. They hated cops. They hate the Republican Party.
Yeah, so much for the law and order party.
Exactly. What is the law and order that they imagine? And I guarantee you that they were furious when they saw cops being berated and harassed over the summer. I guarantee you when they saw Black Americans, harassing or yelling at cops, I guarantee you these men would be furious about that. But here they were beating up and killing at least one cop. It's the sort of thing that, how sometimes you go to dinner with some person and he turns out to be kind of a crazy person and he, unspools some theory. It was just like, well, if this all goes unchecked, they could storm the Capitol. And you're like, okay, this is the last dinner with him. And then it really happened. And I don't know where we are, Danielle. I really don't know.
Let's pause right there, Caitlin, so we can take a message from one of this week's sponsors. The new year is a time for resolutions. Most people's usually involve diet and weight goals, and I know mine do. What about your mental health? Setting targets for happiness and satisfaction in your daily life or for achieving a dream is at least as important as your diet, and it may be now more important than ever. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communicating in under 48 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional counseling done securely online. And there is a broad range of expertise available, which may not be locally available in many areas. And the service is in fact available for clients worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor, and you'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, so you won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as with traditional therapy. That's even now more important than ever when you can't even get to a doctor's office. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit their website and read their testimonials that are posted daily. Visit betterhelp.com/femsplainers. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, and join the over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they are recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Femsplainer listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/femsplainers. That's betterhelp.com/femsplainers. Check it out now. You deserve it.
One of the weird things that has come out of this is this image, I don't know if it persists or will persist, of Trump, you know, when they put him in that kind of Soviet heroic, or maybe like the cover of a romance novel where they shave off all his weight and they make his hair more flowing. And he's like this, I'm sorry, it's just Soviet, like what they used to do with Stalin and Lenin and everybody else. Like he's this.
There wasn't much you could do with Stalin or with Trump, but they did their best. Yes.
They did their best, but he is seen as this kind of gunslinging figure of masculinity. And I just don't get that. I mean,
I always think about this in terms of my father, who was such an athlete and such a, and
a well-known writer, like
a well-known
tell
writer.
Us who he was. Tell us who he was.
Oh, he's Thomas Flanagan. He wrote these kind of well-regarded historical novels, but like he loved the ballet. He hated sports. He was so glad he had 2 daughters. He thought the worst thing in his life, he always said, would be to have some son coming through the house dribbling. He just thought the word dribbling was just so uncivilized. And yet there was no question about his manhood because my father had gone to war.
Yes.
He was a freshman in college and Pearl Harbor was bombed. I'm sure he didn't want to go to war, but it was the Second World War. Everybody went, officer training school and out to the Pacific. So, and that had also given him, for all of his sort of aesthetic, he was a Walter Pater guy. For all of that, my father had a tremendous amount of physical courage, which you would never have expected of him. But there was a break-in in our house once, and there was no question my father was going to be between his women and that person. So I think that idea that manhood is established by certain ancient ways, including war, and then that their war experience would be respected, and that a world would be saved, at least for white men, for them to step into roles of leadership in families and in businesses, is obviously certainly completely lost. And they want something back, but I'm also always mindful of a phrase that someone told me a few years ago. That's, I guess, is an old phrase, that when you're used to privilege, equality looks like oppression. So, things that maybe are being taken away from them, maybe not as a punishment, maybe in a sense of the culture's changing, the world is changing, and things are being spread around a little bit, jobs and college admissions and all those sorts of things. But I have nothing to say. I have nothing to say for myself about what happened. All I can say is there were moments in my life over the last, say, 15 years when I was so angry at the left and so angry at the press that I thought, am I really a Democrat? Should I think about becoming a Republican? And I just heard my late father, it would just he would come back from the grave if I ever did that, that the Democrats are our party and that we stick with them. And when that happened, I just thought, thank God I didn't dabble or truck with this crowd on any level. Thank God I stayed put with the party that I was born into, because I just I think any association with it at all is a recrimination of the person.
Well, I can tell you, as a lifelong Republican, or in Canadian context, a conservative, I grew up, my stepfather was, for all effects, my father. He was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, exactly as you say. And as you wrote in your piece, if your dad had ever been called like a patriot, he would have like gone, oh my God. And my dad would have been exactly the same way, because it's just like showy. It's like,
he would never tell you anything you wanted to know. It was almost after he's dead, I found out. I mean, I knew this, but he was in the Battle of Okinawa, which was a famously gruesome.
Yeah, yes.
He was in the naval battle, not the Marine battle. But yeah, they never wanted to be thought of as patriots. What a ridiculous.
Well, of course, the point was, of course, you're patriotic. And to aggressively call yourself a patriot was to, I think it's to be showy. It's a little false. Like, what are you compensating for? Why are you declaring you? I think that's what's bothered me the most. So my dad was fought in these wars, and then my stepfather, and he then became a journalist and became one of Canada's preeminent,
a very well-known father. Yes.
Right. But he had lived in the Soviet Union as a correspondent. Oh. He became a very prominent Cold War journalist, against the Soviet Union, and big Reagan supporter, as I was. So I feel what has been bothering me about these past 4 years is telling me that unless I, take the knee to this ridiculously romanticized portrait of Trump, that I'm not, quote unquote, patriot. I'm not a Republican. I am a betrayer of my party. And that, I think I sent you that meme that went around, Caitlin, about the guy who did this in one of these online rants against.
Oh, I loved it. I sent it to all my friends. I loved it.
But he was like this. He was like,
kind of a redneck kind of guy.
Sort of being rednecky, and he goes, take back the country from what? I want my country back. I was like, I want my fucking party back. Like, when did it become right that we worship this idol, this gold idol, and pretend that everything he stands for, which has been rotten from the start. And I say that, like, he could have been a Democrat. It's not about partisan politics. He could have been anybody. And he was so obviously bad. And
on every level.
Every level from the start, going in and you knew whatever it was going to be bad, but then people who supported him, if you said he was bad and got angry about him, they saw it as a criticism of them. And that's what was weird. Mm-hmm. And I think it's still true that it became very cultish, and that even people like me who had considered themselves Republicans were now, drummed out of the party, as it were. And in the end, it just became personality worship, but also of the craziest kind. I mean, Caitlin, do you know people of your acquaintances who have actually gone mad, who have become QAnon supporters?
Oh, I don't know to that extent.
I mean, it's happening.
No, but yes, it is happening. And, there was this tension that was building over the summer between, that young journalist, I think it's Chris Rufo, who has exposed and is continuing to expose the way that critical race theory has been built into education and different institutions. And that was powerful journalism. And I am disgusted by the left, whatever I'm in, mainstream media, that people won't touch that story. They won't touch that story.
The critical race theory is part of the abetting of pitting these two sides against each other.
Exactly. And then when Trump, in his blunt, stupid way, said, no, schools have to deliver patriotic education. And I, a former school teacher, said, that is ridiculous. You tell the students what happened, and then they decide if they're patriots. You know, you don't sort of say, I'm going to force this history class into a patriotic position. You say, let me tell you about America, and here's some books to read, and here's some discussions to have. And then you guys will decide, are you patriots or not? And so it was on the crudest possible terms, this war was brewing. And this was the reification of it.
Yeah. Well, I know people who have, many smart people who have cottoned on to the fact that Jeffrey Epstein is still alive. That
yes.
Joe Biden is a child pornographer. And, you know, early on we saw these things, these theories have real world consequences. I guess the Capitol siege was obviously the most alarming, but you know, our local pizza, my local pizza parlor was shot up by a guy who came there thinking that Hillary Clinton and others were carrying on a child sex ring in the non-existent basement of that pizza parlor.
You know, there is precedence for this mass delusion, which is in the 1980s. The McMartin Free School trial, where there was a big, a parent accused this daycare in Manhattan Beach, California, of sort of sexually abusing the children in it. And
it became Satan worshiping.
And Satan. Right. And there was a period in the 80s where these stories, entirely false, but deeply believed by masses of people, that Satan worshiping daycares were everywhere, and that you had tremendous risk to put a child in daycare. And I think both had to do with moments of cultural panic. I think in the 80s, it was the idea of women going to work and leaving their children in these professionally run businesses.
Right.
And now it's this idea that the world has really changed. And maybe they're saying there's a way to turn back the clock a bit, and there's not.
Right. And that's where I think what was happening, as you say, like the Black Lives Matter, the movement, the George Floyd, like it's so just. And this is where I was trying to actually explain this to an English friend of mine who was sort of, I don't like that we're doing this, that the minute you sort of complain about the siege of the Capitol, they'll say, oh, but Black Lives Matter. What, you know, like you shouldn't conflate these two things.
No.
And
only
you can also,
only in the sense of our divided nation, because should you conflate them?
Well, it's also you can be mad at the excesses or critical race theory and also be mad at the cap. Like you don't, that one does not take, being mad about one does not take away being mad about the other.
And nothing that happened over the summer comes anywhere close to storming the citadel of our democracy.
But I was saying to him, like he was sort of the feeling like, oh, you know, yeah, but what was really crazy was the Black Lives Matter stuff. And this, you know, once these siegists, these insurrectionists got in, they didn't really know what to do. Well, now we're finding that that's not true. But I also think for non-Americans, and it's true as, you know, I am now an American, but coming to the country from Canada, that America's race issue is very unique, but completely essential. Like when like coming from Canada, one of the things I was struck by was how big the race issue was in the United States. And of course that goes back to the history of slavery and justifiably so, but it was something that I had never had to think about in the way that I did coming here. So I think people looking in don't understand that.
No, and I've lived in the South.
History and how bad it is and how bad it can be.
Yes, and if it will ever be unwound, I don't know. It may be the thing that brings us down, and that would not ultimately brings us down, and that wouldn't be the wrong issue for us to fall on. If we're going to fall on an issue, that's the one. But we have to remember, once you tear apart a nation that took a long time to build up, what are you going to have in exchange? Just nothing.
You're right about the 80s. We've talked about actually when Emily Yoffe's been on a couple of times, she's like an expert in these puritanical rages that sweep through the nation. And the other thing about the United States, again, for an outsider coming in, is like it's really puritanical, or has these strong puritanical impulses. And you're right. I hadn't made that comparison between these conspiracy theories and those, although these are now going around the world. And I guess they're also fomented by the internet, which we didn't have in the 80s.
Right, supercharged.
Happened.
But in both cases, the media was entirely, in the first case of the childcare, the media was entirely complicit. I remember my father, he was a writer, and he would sort of knock off work around 4:00, and sometimes we'd turn on the television and watch it was so fun. He'd have a drink and I'd have something or other, and we'd watch the Phil Donahue show or something, and they were constantly having people on whose children had been satanically, abused in another.
That was catnip to Phil Donahue. That's right. That was like the high watermark of daytime.
Yes, but this thing, you couldn't question it. The notion that this was happening, if you questioned it, of course, in typical fashion, then you were a satanic child worshiper. And my father just looked at me and said, "Do you think any of this is actually happening?" I said, "I really don't think so." But now, the media is to blame for a lot of it, but no one is to blame for men committing that act. There's no rhetoric, there's no language that could in any way be blamed for what happened. But they are, that class of people are constantly lied about in the mainstream press and loathed. And
can I also, I'm sorry, I don't want to hear about the mainstream press anymore, because to the degree there is one, look, there is a whole super story. I cannot take the whining, I'm sorry, on the right of boohoo. They shut down Parlay for, having all these,
Oh, did they shut that one down already?
Yeah. Well, they won't host it, and therefore it can't cope. And I understand. I don't even want to get into that, but I understand there are free speech issues, yada yada. But right now, when a medium is being used to host insurrectionist coordination, I can see that people get skittish, and I can understand that. I think they should have shut Donald Trump down on Twitter right away and made him use the POTUS account, which would have made him more accountable.
Oh,
this is 4 years ago. If they had not let him post on his personal account, which no president, in our era of internet had done, then that account is the official government voice, and you can't just post crazy things on it.
I see. So I didn't understand that.
If Twitter had sort of cracked down early on the private account, that could have had a lot of beneficial thing. But anyway, look, you've had Fox, you've got Newsmax. They've had a lot of power and a lot of influence. Mm-hmm. And to I think it bothers me when you say, not you, but one says, the New York Times or the Washington Post or MSNBC, as if that's the only thing that matters or has influence.
And I have to take a different position here, because the New York Times, the reason it's such an essential organization is that they set the budget for everyone else's news day.
Well, that's
it's on
true.
The front page of the New York Times, and you're in the local station in Podunk, and you're trying to figure out, you're kind of you're not the crack journalist of the era, and you're like, what national news should we cover? And it's like, well, this is above the fold on the Times. So they have incredible power, and they hate Republican,
but much less so now. No, I agree with you. But
I think they have more power than ever.
Well, it's also because of the collapse of local news, and and that's been a real problem. So yes, in that sense, they do. But On the other hand, people aren't getting their news from that above the fold point. They're getting it from TV, and they're getting it from Facebook. And that's been
New York
a problem.
Times, again, as I say, I really think it's a trickle down from the Times. If they were held accountable for their contempt of a huge swath of America, and if they were held accountable to report about them in the way that they report about others, I think we would have seen a different landscape. It's a private institution. They can do whatever they want, and nothing they could ever print ever justifies these men breaking in with murderous.
But Caitlin, I think you're showing your privilege.
Oh, I am.
Oh my God, because your influence of the New York Times, people, I think we need to hold, and it looks like we are, Facebook accountable.
Oh, you're so right. Yes.
I'm sorry. The people who are storming the Capitol are not angry at the New York Times.
But they are, because the New York Times, exactly. As I say,
I know
they never read it. It sets the budget for the NBC News, the CBS News, all of those news channels. Look to the New York Times. You mean
the nightly news that no one watches?
I'm just saying here that they knew that they were held in contempt by a huge swath of the traditional press as it died and writhed, and it's probably already dead even as I speak. But they knew there was nothing for them. And so they went to another place, and it was a terrible place. And it was the internet.
Well, look, the New York Times and Washington Post have had the best national correspondents.
There's no comparison.
It's been amazing on the news. So if you followed Maggie Haberman and
brilliant,
and Peter Baker and everyone,
excellent.
So they have their woke editorial side.
Never have. They're always saying we have to build up our own infrastructure. The infrastructure at the Times, you meet a Times journalist, you can meet one who's 24 years old. She's brilliant. She knows 2 languages. She could run the place. It is full of the best journalists in the world. It still has bureaus. Remember those?
Right.
And it has, an excellent ability to, whenever they're on a story that's a non-political story, there's nothing like it, right. Because they have those skills.
Well, I don't disagree with you. And we're seeing, and what happened until this point through newsrooms, where now reporters are being instructed in critical race theory. And as you say, there are things now we can't cover, we can't talk about, and that's a huge problem.
I'm working on a piece now about private schools, and I've been kind of delving into things that are going on. And private schools have been very much, another center of inquiry, rightly so, should have started much earlier, but about what life is like for Black students at these schools. And these schools are terrified. They don't want to deal with it themselves. So they've brought in outside consultants because they're just chicken shit. They don't want to face their own issues. And so one private school was doing, all the teachers had to do this massive self-evaluation.
This was in New York, I think.
Yes. No, actually, this one I'm talking about isn't, but I'll identify it no further. And the form that someone was filling out, it was supposed to talk about something about, inclusion of different ideas in the class. But the question was, race is a cultural construct, period. What are you doing about that? And it's well, maybe that assertion is incorrect. Like you're saying, right. To be a school teacher here, you have to assume that is a fact. So it's just something very, and I do think that this is going to continue to be, a major conflict.
All right, let's pause for a second, because we had a listener reach out to us that, Caitlin, I want you to be on to answer, if that's okay. And then, yes. and then we'll wind up this crazy first episode of the season.
Mm-hmm. Enjoying the podcast? Would you say we're worth the price of a cup of coffee to you each month, or maybe better, a cocktail? Please consider becoming a subscriber. The Femsplainers is dependent upon listener donations through Patreon and Glow to keep going. And in return, we offer you an exclusive bonus episode in which you get to join the conversation. You'll also receive our monthly newsletter, and for $10 per month, you can enjoy the weekly podcast ad-free. Plus, you'll receive invitations to our monthly virtual cocktail nights with others in our growing Femsplainers community. So make new friends and have an evening out. How often are we able to do that these days? So go to patreon.com/femsplainers or glow.fm/femsplainers right now to join. Consider yourself a friend with benefits.
Okay, I got my mother's little helper right here, so carry on.
Okay, Caitlin, so we had a little bit of listener reach out. One was about your article in the Atlantic, and this is from one of our listeners known as John Dog. That's what he goes by. And he said, in her latest piece, Caitlin seems to detect a certain aimlessness among the crowd of thugs and gobshites. Gobshits?
Gobshites, yes, that's an English term.
There's an E in there, I don't know why, that entered the Capitol last week. She notes that, quote, once there, they didn't know what to do exactly. And in one of the piece's many mighty lines observes, they were dazed by power and limited in their conception of what to do with it. That was my initial impression as well. I was struck by how unfocused it all seemed. By the way, Caitlin, I also love that in your mail discussion that you noticed that they observed certain rules, that these were almost people accustomed to following rules, and then they were suddenly breaking them.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said, I wonder if Caitlin and or Danielle might have any thoughts on whether this might point to a larger issue. That is, that people seem to mostly protest against things now, rarely for things. For instance, where once racial minorities, exploited workers, and women might have agitated for clearly attainable goals like the vote, better pay, or equal rights, nowadays it often seems like people will express their unhappiness with the world, but never their vision for how to make it better. It's my belief that this is a serious problem and a global one. My working theory in a nutshell is that we're in a world that can no longer be credibly explained by capitalism, communism, or religion, but nothing has taken their place. We may be on the brink of proving as a species that he who believes nothing will fall for anything is a bad belief system. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say first off that, my initial impression as I wrote it was that they didn't have any idea what to do except shit on the floors. And it's coming more and more apparent that they had very evil intents and they had plans for it. But yeah, people are not creating. People need to make something, offer me an appealing alternate vision. AOC is a very captivating person, but the Green New Deal was obviously, a fantasy. Nobody, create something, make something. And it could just be that the forces that he discussed, religion, mainly I always think religion, that we got rid of for, understandable reasons. Modern world came along and these faith stories didn't make as much sense, but they held people in community with one another. And they held people with some sort of a standard that even if they were completely hypocritically denying it, this was before the evangelicals, of course, but that they at least knew what it was they were supposed to do. They at least knew whom to call if there was a new baby or if someone was sick in the family. And there was a sense of incredible community and community caretaking through that. And that has not been replaced. He's absolutely right. And all of these different institutions have not been replaced. And for people in our sort of proximate social class, well, we're able to replace them with all sorts of wonderful things like being on the podcast. But if you're, in an area where you don't have anything as nice as that, and you don't have community, and suddenly you have needs that the government can't fill by its very nature, the government can't fill, and the government's not going to be the answer to this as much as people want it to be. I think he's right that there's a bleakness, and people need to start getting very creative and making things. And it's not going to be the next app, it's going to be something that's bigger than that.
One of the things I agree. And one of the things I've wondered is whether this would have happened or gotten so out of control over the past year because of COVID that I have to feel that these conspiracy theories, this anger, this sense of alienation has been absolutely fueled by people sitting alone at home with their computers and just being fomented into these furies and rages. And
the murder of George Floyd, although it was in itself a complete atrocity leading to an atrocity, gesturing back towards a whole history of atrocities of that exact nature, it also came to stand for the whole crappy Trump everything. Even though there was just, as many horrible cop events under Obama, there was more of a sense that at least the leader of the country didn't think that was a good idea,
or not a big deal, I think.
Right. Yeah. But Danielle, I want to gesture back to the beginning of the show moment about the mainstream media. When there were so many protesters without a mask on, there were endless articles about why that was not a problem. There was a lot of surveys and studies from very renowned places to say, it turns out nobody caught COVID from this. And with this thing, which is far smaller, I can't tell you how many articles that have been, was this a super spreader event?
Well, no, to be fair, the super spreading was the poor Congress people who were trapped in these tiny safe rooms with Republicans who wouldn't wear, some Republicans who wouldn't wear masks, and they did get COVID. Like, there are cases now coming out. So it wasn't from the protesters, it was from these asshole fellow congressmen who you're trapped on your fucking stomach or, hunched, and they're going like, I'm not wearing a mask,
God, they should all go straight to hell.
They should all go straight to hell. Anyway, okay, so sorry. But I agree with you. And it turns out that, being outdoors, unless it's being in clubs and bars and with your family huddled in for Thanksgiving, that seems to be the problem.
Isn't it awful? We're going to have to go outside. Yeah. I hate nature.
All right. This is the last listener thing, and I've saved it to the end because it gets us off all of this topic.
Okay.
It gets us onto true femsplaining topics. And Caitlin, I just know you're going to have so many good thoughts on this. So this came as a private message or direct message, I should say, over Twitter. And she said, "Hi, femsplainers. I'm an avid listener and I'm writing for lady life advice, if you'll humor me. I'm in my late 30s, have sweet kids and a great husband and a successful professional career. For about the last year, though, I found myself wanting something that previously seemed frivolous to me. A boob job. Nursing my babies has left my breasts a little deflated, and whenever I look in the mirror, I just find myself wishing for an extra cup size. I can't decide if this is an impulse I should indulge and just enjoy some C cups for the rest of my days, or if I should strive to age more gracefully and embrace my body and focus on less superficial things. I'm sure the answer to this question varies for everyone, but I'm interested in your thoughts in particular, as you all seem fun and sexy." She called us sexy. "And have a few years more wisdom under your belts than I have. So, is a boob job a bad thing?" Signed, Anonymous.
I'm really still stuck on that she's a C cup and wants a boob job. Should I reconcile myself to this C cups? Gee, 20 years ago, I would have said, this is ridiculous. You're a woman with, much more important or worthwhile things to do than, to like cut open your breasts and put some, bag of silicone in there. That's just ridiculous. Now I feel differently about it because, well, for example, as a breast cancer survivor, I didn't have a mastectomy, but I've met many other women who did. And so they've pursued getting, restoring their breasts. So why should another woman not be able to? And with the trans movement, we're seeing that people have a desire to change their physical selves on a deep level. And I would also say, what I have observed about life, these 59 years, is, and that I always underestimated, is that men really like breasts. They seem to really like them.
They're like dog toys or something, they're like those squeaky dog toys. Give a man a breast and he's totally happy.
He's just totally happy. And it sounds like that it could, it's for her self-esteem, but I'm sure her husband wouldn't mind.
Now, Caitlin, you've just crossed into radical what do we call it? Not non-wokeness, I guess. I want to say political correctness, where how could you even suggest she do something for her husband? This is about her. And if she wants to do it and feel good, she should just do it.
Yeah, but also she sounds like someone who's in a happy marriage. And, she wants, she's not saying I want to have an affair and have these boob job. She's got these kids. She breastfed them. God love her. And she has the money. And I have read studies. They, in LA is so obsessed with
everything
breast
artificial.
Cancer, breast enhancement. That like the regret on breast enhancement is so minuscule, unless you someone's gotten like a triple D cup or something, that women who go in and get a reasonable breast job always are really happy about it. And I can't say she shouldn't do it. I think she should go on the Susie Orman show to find out if she can afford it. But I think the femsplainers, at least for me, are giving her a yes, you can. What about you?
Well, I have mixed feelings, and not for anything that's against having better breasts or even doing it for your husband, which actually I'm for, if that doesn't sound too crazy. But no, So I'm going to cop to having a tummy tuck. I had so many surgeries on my stomach, not least one of them a C-section. Put it this way, like 5 years ago, my stomach looked like an unmade bed. It looked like a bed in a motel, a really cheap motel where like even the mattress is, gone. And it was horrible. And I decided to get a tummy tuck. And just so happy. I can't tell you. Just so happy. But what I think the surgeons themselves never fully warn you enough, and you're never prepared for is, first of all, it's surgery, and surgery is serious. So, doctors will just say, "Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be up and walking, and it'll be great." They won't tell you that you'll have scars like Frankenstein, maybe forever. Breasts, they've gotten better at. They can kind of tuck them in and hide them a little. But, there's scarring. There are side effects. There are complications.
You mean side effects to the pain medication? Or?
No, side effects to surgery. I mean, any surgery, you can have, issues. And I think the other thing, especially with breast surgery, is that they're now finding, they've ruled out, as long as you go to a good surgeon, they ruled out a lot of some of the health side effects with breast implants. There was worry about cancer and things. But they also, you can get scar tissue, they can harden, they can break, you can have to replace them. So when you sign up for something like that, you just have to be very, I think, realistic. I always think that one of the greatest Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales ever written was The Little Mermaid.
The knives are slicing into her
that
legs.
She gives up her fishtail to have legs, but then every step she is condemned for. Every step she takes is like walking on knives, and I think she had to lose her voice as well.
Yes.
So there's always
a better story than the Disney version.
Yeah, the Disney one was
because it really is to be true to yourself.
Right. No, this was Hans Christian Andersen was dark, and so I just think that if she thinks that it will make her happy. I'm sure it will. And as we know, breasts, I've forgotten. I meant to look it up before I came on. The Nora Ephron, the famous Nora Ephron.
Oh, I thought you said you were going to research whether or not men like breasts.
Oh, no, we know that we don't even need research on that one. But no, but that like
Danielle, you are our reporter on that one.
The breasts are Nora Ephron writing this whole essay on being flat chested. And this was in the early 70s and how miserable it was.
And her mother-in-law told her to always be on top during sex because her breasts would look larger hanging down and lying flat. And I was like, that's probably true.
And then she said to women, I remember the essay ended, she said to women who have large breasts are always saying, oh, my back hurts. Mm-hmm. Oh, you know, what the complaint, to them, she had to say, fuck off.
Now, is it true that large breasts give you a backache?
They can, I'm sure.
Wow.
Well, yeah, no, I've known people who've had breast reduction surgery for that reason.
Because of their back?
Yeah, especially if you're short and you have a large shelf, as it were.
Right.
But anyway, I would just say surgery is surgery is surgery. And
listen, I'm a hugely medicalized person because I have had cancer for 18 years and I have stage 4 cancer. Anytime you cannot go into a hospital, anytime you cannot put on that blue surgical gown, anytime you cannot sign those consent forms where you're saying, I understand that you might kill me, I would say is a good day. But if she's healthy and she has the money and she's talked to her girlfriends about it, I don't think there's anything. I think she's kind of saying,
is there anything wrong or super frivolous about it? And I think not. I think these things are real and they do. And as I will say I do have a wonderful fading Frankenstein-like scar across my belly, but I like how I look in clothes.
Right. And,
and I like not seeing these horrible.
For younger women, I'm going to say
battle scars.
Marriage is a wonderful thing because if you're loved by your husband, it's a good marriage. Your husband loves you. He did. You're so worried about that scar. He's so glad he got you safely out of that surgery and back to his home, you know?
Right. What we don't have from Anonymous is what her husband thinks of it. And I know men will say, and good husbands will say, oh, darling, I love you the way you are. Secretly, you could get some 42 triple Ds and I would love it.
You know, I remember in that Year of Magical Thinking, Didion's book, that there's something about staying married to the man who knew you when you were young and beautiful, and he still sees that within you, you know? Yeah. And I think that's very true. And the breast thing, you know, our younger listeners, meaning those born before 1940, may not remember the name Edie Sedgwick, but she was this beautiful debutante blonde, and she ended up in the circle of Andy Warhol, and she developed this mad allegiance to him in his movies. And he just, her whole life was lived for Andy Warhol to take interest in her and put her in the movies. And he didn't have a sustained interest in her. And the idea was that she should get bigger and bigger breasts. She ultimately killed herself. And there was a famous nude photo of her where her breasts were so scarred from silicone. I guess the way they did it was they just injected.
Oh, yeah. It was bad.
It's a whole new world, I think.
Well, surgery is obviously better now, but I think that's right. I mean, if it's.
Well, this is the question, Danielle.
Yeah.
If women didn't get breast implants, would the Capitol not have been stormed?
Maybe if more women got them, it wouldn't have been.
But no, I'm wondering if that's just a sassy, empowered thing to do. And once you get those breast implants, you'll be even more likely to be sassily out of the house and pursuing your career.
No. I think it's more like if they got the breast implants, men would be happier and they wouldn't feel this need to storm the Capitol. And doesn't the Capitol look like one big C cup?
It does. Maybe even an F cup. I think that, this will have to be our next episode. Will be contemplating the role of breast enhancement in the seizure of our Capitol.
Okay. All right. We better end this here before I don't know. There's so many things that are, this will be the first and last episode.
You're having a Manhattan from now on because it's too much fun.
All right. Well, next time I'll plan the recording so it's like 5 o'clock your time and 8 o'clock mine.
You're talking.
And I'll be like by that point, obviously incoherent. But that's
okay. We can both be in our pajamas.
Okay, fair. All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you. So good to have you back.
Yes.
And pray for us this coming week. Pray for us in DC.
I will. And I pray for all the reporters, even in the California Capitol, even though we don't have,
God.
Up in that part of the state is the only place that we have this problem. So, yeah, I'd like to think those men that stormed the Capitol were the only ones, but they're probably all around us.
They're all around us. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Femsplainers is a weekly podcast carried on the Ricochet Network and available pretty much on every podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and watch video of our interviews on YouTube. You'll find links to everything, plus how to contact us directly at femsplainers.com. We survive and depend on your support. Like the show? Consider donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/femsplainers and get our exclusive monthly bonus episode, Last Call, in which you get to join the conversation with our guests. And there's much more. And a big shout out of thanks to our audio and video editor, Nat Frum.